Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And let me go ahead and see if I can find the screen share. There we are. So we were finishing up a Torah Temimah here. It's this one. Let me find it. Yes. We talked about at the mouth of God, and we were talking about a benishika, mita, death, benishika, with a kiss, and how we had used a way of this. It's one of the methods of deriving Torah from the written Torah itself. And since it's derived logically, it's also considered written Torah or the force of written Torah, even though it's not explicitly written. So it's a subtlety, but nevertheless, it's there and it's understandable. At least I think it's understandable. And one of those methods of deduction is called the Gezerah Shava, and that's where you find wording that is exact in one context and find that similar phrase in exactly the same wording. And from that, you can learn from one context to another context. The thing about this is called a Gezerah Shava, but the thing about it is that you can't just come up with your own Gezerah Shavas because it's a very loose kind of deduction. You have to have learned it from your teacher. So presumably these kinds of deductions go all the way back to the first process of, in fact, technically to Moses, who taught the Torah. So, and this is not oral law. Oral law is something else entirely. It's not something that's deduced from words of Torah. Oral law has to do with, as I said, situations where you apply the basic rules to situations that are similar, but and also it would apply to those laws, those strictures that the rabbis came up with. Very often it has to do with that. So, for example, you can't light a fire on Shabbat. Well, it would be the fence that you can't even touch candlesticks on Shabbos, or you can't touch matches on Shabbat, or something like that, which would be rabbinic and would be part of oral law, oral tradition. So let's go on here and find the place. Okay, so we had talked about, he had talked a little bit about what this was involved. We're in this one here. We had this, Al Pi Hashem, we had this in the Rashi as well. Why it didn't say regarding Miriam, why didn't it use that expression, Al Pi Hashem, by the mouth of God? And it says, Ganai Hadavar Lo, it would be sounding kind of awkward. Okay. Umikan, and from this, Shelo Shalatba, that Malach HaMavet, that the angel of death did not have dominion over her, Verima V'Tole'a, nor maggots or worms. In other words, her body was either it was preserved or something like that, or possibly it just melted away, but not with worms and maggots. And there's a story behind that, and that is, it's just a recognition of how can I put it? We aren't so imperfect that we are flawed, and apparently the worms and the maggots were there. And when we see this happening, it's part of an atonement for what we've done that's wrong. And of course, that whole notion, which is in a sense I feel countercultural, to admit and to be very conscious of our failings as human beings, and by being conscious of it to try and improve and perfect ourselves. So anyway, here about the worms and the maggots, and he's got a little bit of a comment here, Torah Temimah. Ze yitba'er, this becomes clear. In other words, this whole deduction becomes clarified. Al pi masha katuv, by what is written. But avodah zara, these abbreviations, of course, tractate called Avodah Zarah, which basically means it means strange worship, and it's a euphemism for idolatry. And page 20, it's a tractate in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, on the B side of the page. And here we go. Demitipa shezorek malach hamavet mimena masriach bechule. So that the way in which the angel of death actually operates is that he casts a drop of something, a tipa, a drop of, like you might say, poison or something that causes the death. Now, again, I feel like it's speaking, of course, very metaphorically, but nevertheless, this idea of trying to meditate exactly what is it, what causes death, why do the functions suddenly cease to operate properly, at least from a spiritual point of view, right? So he says, from this drop that the angel of death casts into a person, mimena masriach, and that's what causes the decay of the body, etc., etc. Umimela, and so automatically, Eloha Eleha lo yit asfun rimavatula. So it was clear, since the angel of death had no dominion over Miriam and wasn't able to put this this drop of whatever, this potion in her. So obviously, because that wasn't happening, so the maggots and the worms weren't able to gather. Yitasfun would be to gather, right? The imkain, and if this is the case, bazeh shemet al pi Hashem, in the fact that she had died, quote, at the mouth of God, velo al yedei malach hamavet, and not by means of the angel of death, Hare batla hasiba. So the very reason, okay, that is mizrikat hatipa, that is to say, the casting of this drop got canceled. It never operated, didn't come into operation. Umimela, and automatically, balta hashlita merima v'toleah. So it automatically then the issue of the maggots and the worms was canceled. That cause was canceled. Don't know if you have any comments to make about these particular Torah Temimahs that we read. So we'll keep going on. So here we'll go back to this particular section here in chapter 20 here. So Vayav, this is following, of course, this halacha of the eglah, of the ashes of the red heifer, right? Egel aduma, yes, eglah aduma. Vayavu v'nei Israel, and the children of Israel arrived. Kol ha'edah, the entire community, midbar Tzin, in the wilderness of Tzin, b'chodesh harishon, in the first month. Vayeshev, and we've had the Rashi on this as well, that we're talking about that the 40 years were up now, and that the entire generation that was to pass on had passed on. Right, and they came Bakadesh or Vayeshvu. Let me double check the word. Yeah, Vayeshev. They dwelt. Ha'am Bakadesh, the nation dwelt in Kadesh, or the people. Vatamot Sham Miriam, and now we have Miriam's death. Right there, Miriam died. Vatika Versham, and she was buried there. And again, I believe we had all the Rashi on that. So now, Velo hayamayim la'edah, and now right afterwards we read that there was no water for the community. Vayika'alu al Moshe, and they gathered against Moses and Va'al Aharon, and against Aaron. So the fact that Miriam's death is associated now with the lack of water is what gives rise to that tradition that many of you have heard of Miriam's well. That now that Miriam was not around, the well was no longer around either. And again, I sense that there may well be a metaphoric meaning behind this, and what that water itself is a very powerful metaphor, and that losing Miriam, of course, meant that they lost this particular influence on themselves. Rashi's not going to go into that, but he's going to be more literal about it, but at least it leaves us something to think about. V'lo haya mayim la'ida, and there was no water for the community, congregation, right? Mikan, and from this we derive shekol mem shana, that the entire 40 years, haya lahem haba'er, that they had this traveling well, right? The ba'er, b'zchut Miriam. It was on account of her merit. So this is an interesting way of trying to express the tremendous influence that leaders have on a community and the kind of benefits that leadership has for a community, and how the community needs to recognize just how important leadership really is, and maybe to appreciate it. So now they've got a problem, and now the standard response is to complain about the leaders, right? The remaining leaders, to give it to them. Vayarev ha'am imoshe, and the people quarreled with Moses. Vayomru lemor, and they made this statement. They said, and again, the good old sarcasm, right, or irony. Velu gavanu, were it not that we died, right? Kegava achenu, as our brothers died, lifnei Hashem, before God. So basically, of course, they're saying, well, now that we've got this problem, we would have been better off had we died along with that generation that was condemned to die in the wilderness. Let's take a look. So Rashi actually gets into a little bit of grammar here. Velu gavanu, halavai, were it not, would that it be, she gavanu, that we died, that we perished, bigvoa achinu, and Rashi tells us, bimitat achinu, with the death of our brothers, that the word bigvoa is a noun. It's not a verb here. Gavanu, we died, that's a verb, but bigvoa is a noun. The death, right? With the death of our brothers. B'mitat achinu. Bedever, specifically, pestilence, in other words, period. Lamad shemitat, or limed shemitat sama, okay? This teaches that dying from thirst, megune mimena, that it's worse, that dying of thirst is worse than dying from pestilence, from dying from disease, that suffering the pangs of thirst is worse yet. So here we go, bigvoa, shem davar, that's a noun, he says. Shem davar means the name of a thing. Who? It is a noun. Kamo, he says, for example, b'mitat achinu, right? Mita is, again, lamut is to die, it's a verb. Mita is the noun, death, the death of our brothers. V'lo yitachen lefarsho, and apparently he must have seen someone who translated it incorrectly, and he says one cannot explain it keshemetu achinu, as our brothers died, which of course would be a verb. She'im kain, because if that were the case, haya lo lehinaked big voa. Okay, it should have been pointed big voa as becholam havav, where this would have been a cholam, a gavoa. Let's take a look at what it says here, just to compare it, right? So here, so it says big va. Notice it would look exactly the same way, but it would be pointed with a dot right up here, big voa. But it says big va achenu. So this tiny little difference is why Rashi feels a need to point this out to us and to make sure that when it's read in the Torah, it's not read as big voa, but big va, right? Not a big difference there. So going back now. They haven't finished complaining. V'lama havetem et kahal Hashem. And why have you brought the kahal literally means a crowd, right? The assembly of God. Why have you brought the assembly of God, El Hamidbar Hazeh, into this wilderness, Lamut Sham, to die there? Anachnu uve'irenu, we and our cattle. So there, notice the reference to the third person, as if, we're not complaining just about ourselves. We're taking into account the plight of the people. So anyway, this is how they're quarreling with Moses and Aaron. They haven't finished. V'lama helitunu mimitzrayim. And why did you bring us up from Egypt? Lahavi otanu, to bring us, ela makom hara hazeh, to this bad place, to this evil place. Lo makom zera, it's not a place of sowing, ute'ena, or seed. It's not a place of seed or fig, v'gefen, a vineyard, verimon, and pomegranate. Umayim ein lishtot, and there's no water to drink. And it feels to me like they're saying, not only is there not enough water to actually irrigate these kinds of plants, and they're not around here, isn't even enough for us to drink ourselves. Vayavosa, this is what they're accusing Moses and Aaron of, and especially, of course, Moses, who's responsible for this. And we can only imagine how frustrating this had to be, and it was not the first time. They've had this kind of complaint more than once. Vayavo Moshe, and Moses came, va'Aharon, and Aaron, mipnei ha'ka'al, from, literally, of course, it means the presence of the community, from the face of the community. They came from the presence of the assembly, el petach ohel moed, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, vayiplu al pneihem, and they fell on their faces. And you've had that expression a number of times already, especially when they're in a position they need to supplicate God. And I suspect that's what they're thinking again, that God, this is right. It's while they're complaining to Moses and Aaron, who are they really complaining to, right? Who are they really complaining about? Vayerach vod Hashem alehem, and the glory, literally the glory or the presence of Hashem appeared to them. Okay, let's keep still going on. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, Kach et hamate, take the rod, v'hakel et ha'edah, and gather together the community, ata v'Aharon, you and Aaron achicha, your brother, udevar v'dibartem el hasela, and you should speak to the rock, le'enehem, in their sight, v'natan meimav, so that it should give its waters. V'hotzeta lahem mayim min hasela, and you shall bring out water from the rock for them. V'hishkita, and you shall water et ha'edah, the community, v'et be'iram, and their cattle. That's the response. And you know at this point, of course, what's going to happen. So Rashi points out this very interesting. It's not just giving water to the people, it's also giving water to their cattle. The et be'iram, and their cattle. And from Bamidbar Rabbah, the Midrash of Midbar Rabbah, Mikan, from here, Shechas HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Mamonam Shel Yisrael. This is quite an interesting and fundamental derivation. from here that the Holy One, blessed be He, is concerned about the property of Israel. That God isn't just concerned about our souls, God is also concerned about what we own and what we have and what we have around us. So, and here, of course, it's said in terms of the Jewish people. And while I would say that I feel it's just another level of God's kindness to us and God's concern. Vayikach Moshe et hamateh milifnei Hashem, and so Moses took the rod from before Hashem, ka'asher tzivahu, as he commanded him. Okay, so far so good. Check. Vayakilu Moshe va'Aharon et hakahal el pnei hasela, and Moses and Aaron gathered together the assembly in front of the rock, right? In the presence of the rock, Vayomer lahem, and they said to them, and now things are going to go south. Shim'u na hamorim, you rebels, listen up. Hamin hasela hazeh, from this rock, notzi lachem mayim, are we going to draw out for you water? So now already there is something going on that is not going to have a good conclusion. But you can imagine, I think what's happening here is the Torah is describing an emotional moment where finally I think Aaron, and certainly Moses, I should say, and Aaron have had it. They are so frustrated and so upset about the lack of appreciation that whenever there's a problem, what's the response on the part of the Israelites? It's to complain and to say, we never should have done this. We never should have done this. We never should have done this. And just not to recognize how far they've come. And of course, one can extrapolate in terms of modernity what you'd like to extrapolate. So, vayakilu vagomer. So they gathered together the assembly, right? Ze echad min hamakomot. This is an example of one place, shechazik mu'at et hamerubeh, where the small contained the great, meaning you had all these, right? We talked about over 600,000 males, 20 years and up, and we're talking about a lot of people somehow gathering in the presence of a relatively small, very small space. So this sentence that they say, Hamin hasela hazeh notzi. This ha is the interrogative hey, and it means they're asking a question. Shall we take out or draw forth from this rock? They're asking. The fee, and so Rashi's trying to explain what exactly are we talking about here? And why would they have said this? Lefi shelo hayu makirin oto. So it says because they didn't recognize it. Now, who's the they? Is the they the Israelites? That they didn't recognize it? Or is it Moses and Aaron? So that's the question when they say that. Is Rashi referring to Moses and Aaron here, that they didn't recognize it, or the Israelites? So we'll have to keep going. Let's see if there's any clarification. The fi shahalach hasela. Okay, this stone actually, anyone who's done gardening, stones seem to have legs. They seem to, whenever you have to do digging, somehow there are more stones around there. At any rate, that's been my experience. So he's saying that this stone went, v'yashav lo bein haslaim, and it went and stayed amongst the other stones, the other rocks, keshenistalek haba'er, when the well went away. So here we go. V'hayu Yisrael omrim lahem, and so the Israelites were saying to them, that is to Moses and Aaron, of course, Ma lachem, What is it? What's going on? Something like that. Me'eza sela, from which rock, totziu lanu maim, are you going to draw forth water? Which stone is going to be that one? Lachach amar lahem. And this is why he said to them, Hamorim, you are rebels, sarvanim, you're deniers. Lashon Yavani, the Hamorim is a Greek, it actually is related, it's a Greek cognate, I think is what he's saying. Shotim, that Hamorim, okay, listen to the word morim, sounds very much like moron. And the word moron is a Greek word, and it means shotim, fools. Morim et morehem. You're trying to teach those who teach your teacher, that you're teaching your teachers. Hamin hasela hazeh. Okay. Are we going to, from this rock, shelo nitztavinu alav, that we were not commanded regarding it, notzi lachem mayim, shall we take water out of? Forgive my translating so literally that I'm moving prepositions and things around in the sentence, but I'm trying to translate the Hebrew as it's coming. So basically, they're saying, you don't know what Moses and Aaron are saying back to them. You really don't know what you're talking about, right? You don't know. So I would have to say that when it says lahem earlier on, it would have to be referring to the Israelites. And we're going to stop here, right over here. And so we are on, we're at this particular juncture, verse 11, excuse me. Any comments before I stop the recording?
So, yeah, in the 40 years, they weren't taught how to take care of themselves. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They don't know how to find their own water. They don't know how to make sure that things are taken care of. I'm just saying, it's been a nanny state for a long time.
I really would say that it's human nature. Remember, they've had the manna all the time, every day, the Shabbat.
They didn't want the manna. They didn't like it.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to come from, based, Gold, on what you're saying, and that is that it's fine. It's fine. Listen, they're in a wilderness. It's very treacherous. It's very tough. I'm going to go that for them. But you know something? There's a nice way to go about asking. So they don't have water. So you go to Moses and Aaron and say, listen, we have this problem. There's no water around. Is there something you can do to help us find the water? That's a nice way to do it. But they don't think of that. They don't want to think of a nice way to ask. They've got to come back with them and speak in this rude way. And something, I think it is something that we have to learn, that we don't always hear ourselves in communicating, especially with people that we love or that we're close to, and talking to them in sarcastic terms and not finding nice ways to just communicate. And I'm wondering to myself if that isn't what it's saying here, that there are a bunch of things that are coming out of this narrative. And that in addition, how Moses and Aaron react. You cannot afford to lose patience when you're a leader. You cannot afford it. And it's tough. And you see how leaders are criticized and made fun of. By the way, some of you may have visited the Lincoln Museum. It was on my bucket list when I left St. Louis. So I went up to Springfield and visited the Lincoln Museum there. And the way in which Lincoln was mocked and criticized, and I mean, really and truly. And you just see how they were insulting about him and really made fun of his height and his physical appearances and everything. And you just can't afford to lose it. The moment you lose your temper, you're done as a leader. You can no longer be in a leadership position, at least at that particular moment, for sure. And that's a great lesson.
When God said, on the rock, he said, just say, bring water.
Speak to it.
But Moses was so mad, so angry, he took that rod, and he's not supposed to do that. He's supposed to say, bring water, so God would give him the water. Now he thinks God thinks he's trying to overcome God by striking the rock. Well, when he struck the rock, Aaron should have said, don't strike the rock again. But he struck the rock again, and Aaron didn't say a thing. So they both got punished, but it was a bad punishment. I can't understand why God punished Moses. He couldn't go into Israel. I mean,
he wasn't going to go anyway. He wasn't going to go anyway.
Let's stop here. I'm not going to respond. And God willing, we still, tomorrow's Thursday and Friday, we will get into these issues because, of course, they're coming right up. Okay, I'm going to
One more thing, Rabbi.
Yeah.
One more thing. I want to know where the grave of Miriam is and the grave of Aaron. Do they have a grave that I can see when I go to Israel?
No.
Nope.
One, because they passed in the wilderness. Okay, so I don't believe there's any tradition as to where Miriam's grave is. And of course, Aaron died, I believe, on Hor Hahar.
Mount Hor.
They probably, Mount Hor. So they have that, but I'm sure Mount Hor is quite a large area. And I'm not aware of any specific place that is designated as Aaron's grave. In all these years, I've never heard of such a place. I'm going to stop the recording right now.
One more thing. Did they give the 30-day mourning? Did Israel mourn for 30 days for Miriam and Aaron?
For
only Aaron,
sure.
I think.
Aaron for sure. For Miriam, we'd have to figure it out, I guess. I don't know that Rashi's going to tell us. I don't believe he is. So it could be, the Gzera Shava operates and that there's all of that too. I'm going to stop.
The way we